So far we've seen children worshipping corn, a breath-stealing thing, machines rising up and deciding they're not a fan of people, which honestly, same. A lot of rats, like a concerning amount of rats, a nostalgia play about childhood trauma, and an industrial press that wants to do a lot more than iron your laundry. And now, we're at the last stop, the Boogeyman. In the Boogeyman, grief isn't just an emotion. It's something in the closet, watching you, waiting for the lights to go out. And yeah, everyone handles grief differently. But the Harper family? They're not dealing with it at all. That's the problem. First up, we need to talk about that opening scene, because this movie doesn't waste time. You've got the baby in the crib, the dark room, and something slowly creeping out of the closet. Subtle? No, not really. But effective, yeah. And the movie's not even trying to hide it. It's called The Boogeyman. We all know what's going on here. You even get that slow zoom-in shot on Lester in the photograph by the crib, leading us to the really important part that comes soon after, because this is where the movie shows you how the family gets infected, for lack of a better word. And the Harper family is vulnerable for infection, because they recently suffered a loss themselves. Will's wife and their mother recently passed in a car accident. Which brings us here. And this whole setup, this scene, this is basically the original story. It's a short story, about 7,000 words, give or take, and it's just a therapist, his patient, and something in the dark. 2 people, 1 room, and a lot of tension. In the original version, Lester is not great. He's described by director Rob Savage as aggressively bigoted and not hugely sympathetic, which is a polite way of saying he's kind of insufferable. But in the movie, they shift him a bit. He's still unsettling, but now he feels worn down, broken, like someone who's already been through it and come out the other side significantly worse for the wear. And the whole time you're watching him, you get this feeling that something's off. I'm not going to spoil the whole scene, but I think we both know this is not ending well. There is one line, though, that I have to bring up. Will's looking at this drawing Lester's kid made, and he asks, "What is this supposed to be?" And Lester says, "It's the thing that comes for your kids when you're not paying attention." Yeah, no thank you. And the whole time you're watching this, you're thinking, is Will paying attention? No. Because soon after, there's this great moment where the camera angle shifts, and Lester suddenly feels a lot more imposing, like Will is realizing way too late that something is very wrong here. And Will, the least observant therapist of all time, is played by Chris Messina. And he's one of those actors where you've definitely seen him before. You just might not immediately place him. He's been in stuff like 6 Feet Under, The Newsroom, The Mindy Project, and also Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, which is still one of the most ridiculous titles ever. I kind of love it. And then you've got Lester, played by David Dastmalchian, who at this point is basically horror royalty. Also, fun crossover, he played Polka Dot Man in The Suicide Squad, which also has Harley Quinn, so weirdly, they connect. But he's also been everywhere. Marvel, DC, even popping up in the Arrowverse on The Flash. At this point, if there's a cinematic universe, he's probably been in it. He also might have Christopher Nolan's number on speed dial, which means if he shows up in your horror movie, you just got upgraded. There's not a huge cast here, so it's pretty easy to zero in on the important ones, and really, everything revolves around Sadie. Sadie, Will's oldest daughter, is probably the most fully realized character in the movie. She's basically grief in human form. You see it in everything she does. She's stuck, she's struggling, but she's also the only one actually trying to move forward. Her whole arc, going from completely broken to slowly putting herself back together, that's the backbone of the movie. And there's this really nice thread, pun slightly intended, with her mom's dress. It shows up everywhere. In her mother's art, on her, in the wash, and eventually burning. Which is about as subtle as this movie gets, but it works. Like I said, she's also the only one actually trying to deal with what's happening. Everyone else is just frozen. And then there's the scene at Lester's house. Sadie goes there to figure out what's going on and meets Rita, Lester's wife, who is apparently living entirely by candlelight. Which, look, I get it, light is important in this movie, but at a certain point, get some LEDs. The dollar store has options. This feels like a fire hazard. It's a great scene though, really tense. And it shows just how far Sadie is willing to go to understand this thing and move on. Because she's kind of in between everything. Not really a kid anymore, not fully an adult either. And now she's dealing with all of this on top of it. Sadie is played by Sophie Thatcher. And she's another one where you've definitely seen her before. You just might not know where. She's been popping up everywhere lately. Stuff like Yellow Jackets and even the book of Boba Fett. And honestly, she feels like she's on her way to becoming a full-on horror regular. Especially with movies like Maxine and Companion in her catalog. And now there's Sawyer, the younger sister, and probably the smartest person in the movie. Because she's a kid, she doesn't overthink anything. She just accepts what's happening and adapts. Which is why she's basically walking around with a light source at all times. Again, smartest person here. She's also dealing with a loose tooth, which is such a small thing, but it works really well as an analogy. Because she's stuck in that space of, this has to happen, but I really don't want to deal with how it's going to feel. Which honestly, same energy as the rest of this movie. And I vaguely remember that feeling myself as a kid, with a tooth hanging by a thread of gum. Sawyer is played by Vivian Lyra Blair, who you might recognize as young Leia from Obi-Wan Kenobi. So yeah, unexpected Star Wars crossover. She's also been in Bird Box and the TV version of Fatal Attraction. So she's already got a bit of horror experience too. And yeah, I know I'm going on a bit here, but this is one of those things the movie actually nails. The structure, the characters, the way everything connects. It's all really solid. Right away you know who everyone is and what they're dealing with. There's even a line early on, before Lester shows up, where Will's talking to another patient, and she repeats his whole philosophy back to him. Where there is fear, there's your task. Which is a great line, and also something Will is absolutely not prepared to follow himself. Because everything in this movie lines up around that idea. You've got the high school bullying, because bullies don't care that your mom just died. You've got the loose tooth, that weird unavoidable change that you don't want to deal with. And then you've got Will, completely frozen, stuck between holding on to what things were and the reality that they've already changed. And that's where horror works best, when it's not just the monster, it's what the monster represents. In this case, grief, which is a hell of a speed bump. Now, getting this movie to the theaters was kind of a process. It was originally greenlit back in 2018 by 20th Century Fox, and then immediately thrown into chaos when Disney bought Fox. The project gets cancelled, disappears for a bit, then comes back in 2021. At that point, it's supposed to go straight to streaming on Hulu, which honestly was happening a lot around that time. Movies made for theaters went to streaming movies went to theaters, it was kind of a mess. Thanks COVID. Very snake eating its own tail energy. But then the test screening went really well, and it gets moved up to a full theatrical release. Even Stephen King weighed in, basically saying, yeah, this belongs in theaters. He actually used some colorful language to say that, but YouTube probably won't love it, so I'll let you fill in the blanks. And honestly, I agree. Because in this current wave of horror, this weird little renaissance we're in, the Boogeyman stands out. And that's actually saying something, because there have been a lot of bangers. Which is why it's kind of strange this one feels not ignored, but definitely underappreciated. Now, part of why this works comes down to the people behind it. You've got Scott Beck and Brian Woods, who also worked on A Quiet Place, and even did a smaller horror movie called Haunt. Love Haunt. And then, when the project came back to life, Mark Heyman was brought in, who worked on Black Swan and The Wrestler. So yeah, pretty solid lineup. And then there's Rob Savage. He was already making movies at 19, very Stephen King-esque, and really put himself on the map with Host. Which, if you haven't seen it, is basically a Zoom seance made during COVID, and somehow works way better than it should. And you can feel the talent there, the restraint, the patience, the way this movie treats the monster, more like Jaws, where you don't see it all the time, just enough. He even said he wanted that mix of creature feature and haunted house. And honestly, he nailed it. So much so that you kind of start wondering, where are the sequels? This feels like a story you could easily build on. And yeah, maybe the sequels end up being a streaming thing eventually. That would be ironic, but Disney Plus needs that content. Who knows? But either way, it feels like there's more here. Because this is one of those movies that probably deserved a bigger moment than it got. Especially opening up against Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which is not exactly easy competition. So yeah, if you haven't seen it yet, definitely check it out. It's one of those horror movies that quietly does a lot right. And honestly, it deserves a bit more attention. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Curious what you think. Did this one work for you? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you on the next one.